So, I want to tell you about our story of how we moved from developers and operations to DevOps and autonomous teams. When I say we, I want to tell you my story. My name is Jessica Andersson. I work at Meltwater as an infrastructure engineer, and I've been with the company since 2016. And that's also when we kicked off this effort. I'm also a co-organizer of the Kubernetes Göteborg Meetup group, and I'm very involved in the Cloud Native Nordics community, which is an open source community around CNCF projects and Kubernetes. If you want to contact me at any time, give me feedback on my talk, ask about anything I work with or similar things, you can reach out to me at the Kubernetes Slack, the Cloud Native Nordics Slack, or the CNCF Slack, and maybe the Linux Slack at Jessica, because that's me. You can also send me an email, or you can tweet me at solidtubes. So, I work as an infrastructure engineer at our platform team, or you can call it developer experience, engineering efficiency, engineering enablement. We call it foundation mission. What we do is that we try to deliver services and products internally to our development teams that will make their lives easier. So traditionally, that would be something that a lot of team needs to do, but maybe they don't need to build their own solution for it, such as logging or container orchestration. Have you heard of Kubernetes, for instance? Well, I deliver that. So, I'm from Meltwater. The story I'm going to tell you about is a Meltwater story. What we do is that we provide localized insights and dedicated support to clients across the globe. We're very international. We help companies to monitor the brand and check out the social marketing, quantifying the PR impact, and knowing the share and connecting to influencers. We have plenty of products, but if you don't work in PR marketing, you probably never use our products. That's okay, but we do tech, and we're cool. As I mentioned, we're international. So these are the locations where we have engineering offices. Personally, I work in the Gothenburg office, but my team is spread out over Gothenburg and Budapest. But in all these locations, we have engineering offices, and in addition to that, we also have a lot of remote workers that work from home. So just looking at this, you can probably start to understand some of the challenges that we have at Meltwater, mainly multiple time zones. So I want to tell you about where we came from, where we were when I joined Meltwater, and the reason why we ended up where we were. I also want to tell you why we wanted to change, because it's not just, if everything works fine, you probably don't need to change anything, right? And then I also want to tell you about what steps do we take and what do we do in order to make sure that we manage to get this change done. Starting out, we were an Agile organization. That means that every team, almost, worked with some kind of Agile methodology. It was either Scrum or maybe a Kanban thing. And also something that we do work with, and that has been at Meltwater since before I joined, is that we also have Agile coaches. Agile coaches is someone that works with your team in order to help your team pick the best process for your team, and also develop and make sure that your team can deliver very efficiently while making sure that everyone is okay at the team and mentally fine. As I mentioned, distributed. It's very hard to be a distributed organization because it's not just, oh, I'm going to head down one floor and talk to someone, or calling across the office room or whatever. It's all about figuring out who do I need to talk to, where does that person live, are they awake, do I need to send an email and then get a response later on, or is this something that I can do right now? And we had a TechOps team. Our TechOps teams were our technical operation team, and they were also distributed in order to be able to have a follow the sun on-call rotation. They were distributed and located in Tokyo, Berlin, Gothenburg, Manchester, and San Francisco. So what does follow the sun mean? That means that early Japan morning, someone in Tokyo would go on call. And then they would be on call during their workday, and when they checked out in the afternoon, someone from Europe took over. And then someone from Europe took Europe daytime. And when it's time for checkout for them, someone in Manchester East Coast took over. Until it was evening for them, and then someone in San Francisco took over and held it until Tokyo morning. This means that there was always someone working that was managing on call and taking care of production issues and anything that needed to go into production. So how did our workflow look and how did it develop? Like, what happened when we knew we wanted to build something before it ended up in production? We had our users. They came with requests, feature requests, etc. We put it on a backlog. The development teams, the teal color one, pick it up. They code something, maybe a feature, maybe a new search functionality, something like that, and they build a binary. And they throw it over the wall to the operations team. Everyone can see where this is going, right? It's a great idea. So what they do is that they put it on a backlog, a new backlog, and this backlog was for the operations team. And then whenever operations got to that part in the backlog, they deployed something to production. This was very good at this point in time when we started introducing this because we were very quick to deliver, we had quick turnaround, and people could focus on the things that matters the most to them. Which means that the customers were happy, the developers were happy, and operations were happy. Super good. But also with success. So this was successful. We managed to deliver something that our customers liked, so we got more customers. And we got more feature requests. And that means that the developers did more things, which meant more things ended up on the operations backlog. And which meant that also, when you scale things, things start breaking. So at this point in time, things started breaking in production. And this feedback loop was sent back to the operations team. And whenever they found something that needed code changes, they put it back on the development backlog. The customers were still very happy because they got the features quickly. Operations were not that happy because they started getting paged. Development wasn't that happy because they had trouble deciding what to work on. Should they care about what the operations sent back to them, or should they just focus on delivering more features to the happy customers? So even great success, we get even more customers. We get even more feature backlogs. More development teams, because if you need to build more features, you need more developers, right? More things ended up on the backlog for operations. Operations didn't grow. They were still the same 10 people that they had been for years. Things started to go really bad in production, and it was more firefighting. There was less time for innovation and fixing things. Operations did not have time to innovate on technical solutions for production environments. They didn't have time to do long-term improvements on things that needed to be fixed. They did a quick fix so they could go on and put out the next fire. At this point in time, operations were very not happy. Developers were slightly less happy than before, and customers actually started getting sad because however much they asked for new features, they couldn't get it through. And they might have noticed some stability issues as well, so they were starting to get annoyed. All right, this is when I joined Meltwater. It was a great time. So, in conclusion, why did we want to change? And as I said, I would say it's mainly the constant firefighting. We had so many things that were slightly broken that we needed to try to fix and keep alive, that we didn't have time to focus on new development. We couldn't get to the innovation. We were standing still on the same technology that had been done the last 2 years. We did not have time for long-term improvements. Everything was a quick fix. It's not sustainable in the long run. We needed to change something. We also had a disconnection between the priorities. So the feature work versus the technical improvements. The backlog, the pain was felt by operations, and they put things back to the backlog. But the backlog was maintained by PO that was very disconnected from the issues in production. And they were more focused only on this feature work from the customer requests. And the pain was maybe visible for the development teams, but they did definitely not feel it themselves, which made a large disconnection and also kind of strained relationships between some people. We also, in addition to this, we had a silo effect throughout our offices. As I mentioned, we're very distributed, and if one team was doing something great and find a good solution to something, it was a huge risk of that not being shared across the organization, because maybe it was shared to more development teams in the same office, but not outside that office. So we had the silo effect as well that we struggled with. So how did we go about changing this then? We started by empowering our teams. We gave them the power to bring something from idea to end user, the full process, the full line. We also gave them the autonomy to have the power to make their decisions themselves. We gave them the power to be able to decide how to make something work. They knew what needed to be done, but now they could also decide how to do it. And also with that kind of power and that responsibility, previously they had the responsibility of delivering something, but they might not had the power to actually do that. Now we gave them the full responsibility and full power to deliver. And of course, we introduced DevOps. I think the main thing that I want to point out here is that when I say we introduced, I'm saying that our leadership team introduced these things. We had a really strong leadership team that really drove these questions and made sure that it was well communicated, the clear end goal, and they made sure that everyone was in on this. And that was what in the end led us to success. But of course, when someone says, we have been developers and operations, now we're going to do DevOps, a lot of people had questions. A lot of people were concerned. A lot of people were worried. Some of the questions was like, how do we knowledge share? Like, how can we make sure that the knowledge that is currently with operations end up with the teams that need it? What skills do I need to learn? I'm a developer. Do I need to touch production? Will I be on call? How much will it cost? What about stability? And will it work? How do we know if it works? Knowledge sharing was something that we started figuring out, how can we do this? So we decided to set up meetings. We picked one team to start off, and that team got a dedicated tech ops person that spent time with them and figured out what they needed to learn and made sure that that knowledge ended up with the team. We called it operations enablement, and it was something that helped the team to gain the knowledge that they needed in order to take over full responsibility of their production environment. It's important in this case to start small, because at this point in time, we were probably somewhere around 300 developers and only 10 people in technical operations. So as you can see, we could not just kick this off with every team right away. We needed to be sparse with the resources of our technical operations people. They were still constantly firefighting. They were still trying to keep everything alive. And now we told you, you need to also share what you're doing with these development teams. What skills do we need to learn? A lot of the developers probably saw a picture like this in their mind. We told them, you're going to own your production environment. I can tell you as well that the operations people, because we decided not to fire everyone, that would not have been clever. So what we decided to do was that we wanted to disband the operations team, but we wanted to keep the people. We didn't have enough of them to just distribute one per team, but they were going to relocate to a different development team. So for their sake, it was rather like, I don't have to care about service anymore. I need to learn a programming language. What is Java? What version it is? Spring Boot? What is that? Agile processes? I need to work with a backlog rather than just catch whatever is thrown at me. It was a lot of things to be learned from both sides. So what we needed to do was to set up a lot of things and figure out what people needed to learn. So we set up something that I choose to call a confidence matrix. Basically, it was something that was set up for each team, where we listed all the things that needed to be done with the production environment and what skills that the team did currently not have. And then each person in the team had a chance to rate themselves on a scale from 1 to 5, how confident they were with that task. So 1 would be not confident, I need onboarding. Basically, I haven't touched this before. 2 would be somewhat confident, but I need guidance. 3 would be mostly confident, but I need consulting. Maybe I just want to run my idea by someone before I apply it. 4 would be someone that is very confident and can give guidance to someone else. And 5 is the expert, can write a book, probably write all the code themselves. So what happened was that everyone got to rate themselves, and this is a place where you need to have some trust in your organization, so that someone feels that I'm not going to be fired because I put a 1 on this task. There has to be a confidence that this is something that is in place for helping me learn, rather than being something used to punish me. So what we did after that was that we decided that we needed to have at least a number 4 from one person in the team. that is the confident can provide guidance. This means that that person can teach everyone else in the team this task. So once we did that, we figured out which ones we didn't have enough knowledge in. In this case, create dashboard for metrics on service B and modify alert for service B. And then we knew this is where we want to spend time with our dedicated tech ops person who will help us to learn these things. And that was something that we followed up during this operations enablement period, which helped us gain all the skill set that we needed in order to be able to confidently take on production ownership. Will I have to be on call? Short answer, yes, most likely. It's a good idea to be on call for the things that you own and the things that you put in production. I do know that there are some reasons that someone might not be able to be on call, but most of the time I would say it's a very good thing to be on call. Because that means that you will be able to know when something breaks, you get to know your service in a totally new way that you didn't know before, and also that means that you will be able to put pressure on your production owner, product owner, that we need to fix this, something is broken. We cannot push this feature through right now before we fix this issue that we have in production. Because I got paged the last 3 nights, and I don't like that, so I don't want to be paged. It's not about having the superhero style, I'm going to be awake every night, fix all the things, constant firefighting, because that's the thing you don't want to have. But if you're not on call for your own things, you might not be able to know if that happens, and you can't fix the things so no one gets paged. There was also some concerns when we started putting our developers on call, mainly from our support organization, that we would lack instability because we let people that weren't that used to handling the production environment, we put them to be on call and we respond whenever there was an alert. But what we did see instead was that when developers went on call for their own services, we actually ended up in a state where we had much more stability than we had before. So it was a concern that was not really turned out to be true. Regarding on-call, what will it cost? I strongly suggest that you pay your on-call engineers something when they go on call. It's not fun to do it without extra compensation. So remember I told you about the follow the sun rotation? That meant that someone was always on call during the daytime when they worked as a regular workday. Now I asked everyone to be on call for their own services, which meant that people in Europe would be on call during day-night time for their service, which meant that we would have to pay, instead of 1 person, we would have to pay 50 people on our 50 teams, 1 person per team. So it was like a huge investment, and in addition to that, it's also very complicated. I don't know if you know it, but in Sweden we have laws that say that you cannot be on call for more than 11 days in a row. Then you need your 36 hours weekly rest. That's the Swedish law. If you're in Hungary, you can't be on call for more than 7 days per month, because that's their law. And then every country has their own separate law on how you can handle on call and what is allowed to do and not. And if you, as me, are in a team that has people from different countries, then you need to try to puzzle that out whenever you set up on call rotations. Except the US, because they can just be on call whenever. No one cares. So despite these things, the cost, the complexity, the laws, our leadership team and our company still decided that this is something that is worth more than the cost, so we're going to invest. But be aware that it will be an additional cost. So what about stability? I already kind of mentioned it partly, but it's previously, before we pushed something to production, it had to go through the operations backlog, which means that operations was the gateway for everything that went into production. And in case something happened, our support team only had 1 single point to turn to. It was whatever time zone where you currently were in, depending on who was on call. But with autonomous team and each team owning their own thing, everyone started pushing to production. I would say that we also at the same time managed to start delivering much faster, which meant more deployments, and more deployments per day, more deployments per hour, which meant that it was very hard for our support team to keep track of who did something last, who is responsible for something breaking, who owns this part of the software, who should I turn to in case something breaks. So how can we coordinate and how can we trace this? We set up something that was a Slack channel that was called Changes Releases. In this channel, every team had to state whatever they wanted to deploy. They needed to add it like a risk. How likely is it to impact customers? Will it be in a downtime? What's the rollback plan? How long will it take to deploy? Etc. And once they have done this, support could coordinate and they could get an ACK back from support. And once they got that, they could go ahead and deploy. We also had an incidents room where, in case something broke, we could coordinate with each other. Because often there's something, if something breaks, then something else is affected as well. So multiple teams might get paged, but it's only one thing that is broken. So this is a good place where these teams could collaborate and go together in order to debug an issue, ongoing issue. We also have guidelines in our organization about spending 30% of the time on tech improvements. This is something that has been very useful because it's a clear contract between the product owner and the teams that this is the expectation, which means that there's no longer such a great conflict between developing features or developing tech improvements, because you have the contract, and that means, sure, for like one sprint, you can select to do no tech improvements, but that probably means you do more the next sprint, right? And this is something that I think have played a large part in making our product more stable. So will it work? I'm not sure how to measure success on this, but we managed to complete our operations enablement in less than a year, which meant that we kicked it off in May 2016, and early 2017, the last team was operations enabled, our operations team was disbanded, and the members had joined different development teams. I think it was a success, but it did work out for us mainly due to the communication that our leadership team was driving during this transformation. It was very clear, and it was often, it was like constant to keep us reminded, to know where we were going, and to make sure that we felt more secure about what was happening. Because people were worried, but I think that the communication and the show of the constant success that happened and the celebration of the success, whenever a team was done, it was celebrated, and it was something that was shown and communicated to everyone. So someone might feel that they could do it, I can also do it. And that was something that in the end led to victory. So if you want to take on a similar effort, I would recommend to first understand your organization, where do you come from, because your story will be different from mine. Also understand why you want to change. Like, what is not working currently, what do you want to change to? And then also have a clear plan and a good leadership team. Make sure that your leadership team is committed and are driving this goal, because I think this is an effort that needs to be driven top down and not bottom up. With that, I'm done. Thank you. Any questions? Yes. So the question was about our teams, and I said that they are covering on call around the clock and supporting it. So the question was how that works with the full ownership, right? So what happens is that one team, we try to not spread teams out too much across time zones because it's hard to collaborate, it's hard to work together. So most of our teams are either co-located or at least in the same time zone or close enough. And then what we do is that they own something, and when they work they end, they are still on call. So in case something breaks, they get paged. But the default idea is that it should not page them because it should be stable enough to not page them. But that means that potentially someone could actually go home from work, get paged, and start working again. But then it's not about developing code, then it's about mitigating a problem until tomorrow when you fix it for real. Did that answer your question? Thank you.
What about the customers? Were they willing to pay more for this type of service? Or?
So the question was about the customers, if they were willing to pay more for this kind of service. I would say our customers didn't know about this transformation. They were never aware about it. What we do sell is that we sell a product with a price, and they pay it. And the calculations for if we can cover that with on-call, it happens within the organization. It's not transparent for the end user. There's no different options for them. For this is totally not transparent for the customer. So the question was, since we have customers everywhere and we have teams that own something, in case something breaks outside office hours that a team own, will the customer have to wait until the next day, or will another team step in and fix it? That was the question. So what will happen is that the customer will not have to wait. The team will step in and they will fix it. They might not fix the root cause, but they will fix the problem so that the customer can continue to use the service. Most of the time, I hope the customer doesn't even notice, because I hope we page before that. But what happens is that the team gets woken up. It can be 3 a.m. I've been up 3 a.m. more times than I care to acknowledge. But what they do is that they fix it good enough that it will hold until the next day. Because the idea is not to keep someone up all night, but the idea is not to have downtime for the customer. And also the other teams might help if they're in a different time zone, but ultimately it's the responsibility of the team that is on call. So even if there's their middle of the night and daytime for another team, the middle of the night will still do it. Another question? I think the question was if we have products that are spread over multiple time zones. So what we do is that we do deliver the same product to all our users. We are software as a service, SaaS. And that means that we provide, it's more like you can get different packages, but it's still the same software. It runs in the web and it's available at all times. So we have constant availability, considering that we have customers all across the globe. Did that answer? Perfect. Any other? So the question is what my role was in this transformation. Sorry, I should have spent more time on that. When I joined, I was a regular developer in a regular development team taking ownership of our production environment. I was working on our Elasticsearch cluster, which holds many gigabytes of data. So taking production ownership of that one was a little bit scary. But after this transformation and a little bit over half a year later, I joined our platform team, which became more required after we went to DevOps.
Yes, one thing is the added cost when you go to DevOps. That's one thing, but did you also see a problem that you would actually need more resources, and that's very hard to get on the market today? Like, I mean, if you go to wake 3 a.m. in the morning, you cannot work the next day and so forth. So the productivity for the whole company might like go down like 10% or 15% or something, and you need to recruit more people to fill the gap.
So the question is, when we went to being on call and DevOps, we not only increased the cost for on call, but we might also increase the cost in cognitivity and being awake and being available. And when you wake up and you're on call, then you get some time off later on. So did we see production going down after this? I would say no, actually, because what happened was that we got quicker turnarounds for the teams. They got quicker feedback cycles. And I think in the end, we built more stable things, which meant that we spent less time on fixing them, less time on putting out fires. And in the end, I actually think we moved faster. That in combination with our platform team, I would say has been useful, because that means that not every team has to figure out how to deploy something to production. they run it in Kubernetes and then don't have to care about it. And that fits maybe like 80% of the teams, which means that we then can remove that cognitive overhead from 80% of the teams. So I think in the end, we made an investment, and I think we gained so much more. I don't have any numbers, but any other? Cool, then thank you.